While 1984 is certainly a story about just how far government control can be pushed, it's also easy to overlook the fact that it's a love story. Fans of the novel will know that Winston, our hero, has always harboured rebellion within his own secret thoughts and heart. But by the conclusion of the first part of the story, his own opposition to the party spreads to the next, interpersonal level. Winston surreptitiously receives a note from a dark-haired girl he has always both disliked and desired. On it are the words, "I love you." From this, a passionate and highly forbidden love affair ensues, a relationship that makes both Winston and Julia very happy. However, today we shall focus on the initial meeting and attraction of Winston and the theme of sex as rebellion in the novel. In particular, we shall look at the corrupt to the bones dialogue and the deeper meaning behind the exchange. This is not to chalk the whole relationship down to this one dimension of the couple, but simply to consider the initial attraction, at least on Winston's part. As we know, Winston secretly despises the party and Big Brother, and keeps a diary from the beginning of the story to recount his frequent thoughts on his life and the totalitarian society he suffers through every day. On the surface, he laments that everyone seemingly buys into the party line. Everyone, at least superficially, reveres Big Brother, fully accepts the principles of Ingsoc, and totally embraces the lifestyle enforced by the thought police and all the other mechanisms of oppression in Oceania. Though it's possible there are some like Winston, people who reject Big Brother and the rest of it, Winston can never be sure of this, at least at that stage. Even his suspicions about the unorthodoxy of O'Brien are very tenuous at best, based on a quick flash of the eyes at the 2 minutes hate. Funnily enough, given how events ultimately pan out, Winston feels the reverse about Julia, the dark-haired girl. Though he is physically attracted to her, he is also repelled by her, and most young women like her. Winston explains that it's down to their typical fanaticism, such women being among the most bigoted members of the party. Quote, "swallowers of slogans, the amateur spies and nosers out of unorthodoxy." Ironically, Julia does prove excellent at nosing out Winston's own unorthodoxy, later explaining that it was something in his face that initially attracted her to him. From his facial expression, she concluded he was against the party. For Winston earlier on though, Julia felt particularly dangerous, with him interpreting her occasional staring at and close proximity to him as hostile acts. To be fair to Winston, his mistaken interpretations here were based on what he generally knew about the women of the party. Quote, "The women of the party were all alike. Chastity was as deep ingrained in them as party loyalty. By careful early conditioning, by games and cold water, by the rubbish that was dinned into them at school, and in the spies and in the youth league, by lectures, parades, songs, slogans, and martial music, the natural feeling had been driven out of them. His reason told him that there must be exceptions, but his heart did not believe it. They were all impregnable, as the party intended that they should be, and what he wanted, more even than to be loved, was to break down that wall of virtue, even if it were only once in his whole life. The sexual act, successfully performed, was rebellion. Desire was thought crime." A long quote, but vital to understand Winston's later memorable words and attraction to Julia. Winston's attraction and desire to sleep with Julia is thus closely tied with his own desire to oppose the party. Sex is very much a political act, and an act of opposition at that. Julia herself explains why this is so later on. Quote, "When you make love, you're using up energy, and afterwards you feel happy and don't give a damn for anything. They can't bear you to feel like that. They want you to be bursting with energy all the time. All this marching up and down and cheering and waving flags is simply sex gone sour. If you're happy inside yourself, why should you get excited about Big Brother and the 3-year plans and the 2 minutes hate and all the rest of their bloody rot?" This is the source of the party's ban on the sex act between party members outside of the joyless sex used within marriage to sire children. In contrast to his relationship with Julia, Winston's relationship with his wife was, unfortunately for him, typically orthodox. Catherine would stiffen, and while the act itself was performed, Winston felt the odd sensation that his wife was both submitting whilst simultaneously resisting, no enjoyment on her part. Catherine's attitude to sex is, for the party, the only legitimate one. A couple's duty to the party in begetting offspring is the aim of sex and marriage. Any other variation is termed sex crime and, by definition, rebellion. Prior to Julia, Winston assumed all women were like his estranged wife. When considering all of the aforementioned, we can better understand the dialogue of Winston and Julia's initial meeting. In the clearing, the two have the following exchange. "Have you done this before?" "Of course, hundreds of times. Well, scores of times anyway. With party members?" "Yes, always with party members." "With members of the inner party?" "Not with those swine, no. But there's plenty that would if they got half a chance. They're not so holy as they make out." His heart leapt. Scores of times she had done it. He wished it had been hundreds, thousands. Anything that hinted at corruption always filled him with a wild hope. Who knew, perhaps the party was rotten under the surface, its cult of strenuousness and self-denial simply a sham concealing iniquity. If he could have infected the whole lot of them with leprosy or syphilis, how gladly he would have done so. Anything to rot, to weaken, to undermine. He pulled her down so that they were kneeling face to face. "Listen, the more men you've had, the more I love you. Do you understand that?" "Yes, perfectly." "I hate purity. I hate goodness. I don't want any virtue to exist anywhere. I want everyone to be corrupt to the bones." "Well then, I ought to suit you, dear. I'm corrupt to the bones." "You like doing this. I don't mean simply me. I mean the thing in itself." "I adore it." Interestingly, before this exchange, Julia is ready to make love, but Winston is not. Once they have this exchange, however, Winston has no problem. We can see then that Winston's sexual desire is inextricably linked to and sparked by the fact of the act as forbidden and rebellious in itself. In an earlier thought, and then later in reality before they actually make love, Winston admires Julia's own casting aside of her red sash, emblem of the Junior Anti-Sex League and symbol of the party's grip over the sexual act. Indeed, in the imagined version, no overt sexual desire was provoked, but simply admiration of the act in itself that could so easily defy the power of the party. Without the context we have been exploring, Winston's comment about whether Julia had had affairs with members of the inner party might have seemed an inquiry in the negative. Had she been sleeping with the enemy, so to speak? However, the question answered in the affirmative would likely have increased Winston's pleasure. Even the core of the party itself would have been compromised. Winston was likely somewhat satisfied with Julia's assurance that many would sleep with her if offered the opportunity. So there we have it, the context behind the famous exchange between Winston and Julia on their first meeting, sex as rebellion in 1984. What do you think? Are there any other themes you would like to explore? Let us know in the comments, and remember, Big Brother is watching you.